Most men spend their lives waiting for the right moment, waiting for permission, waiting for someone to validate their worth before they take action. And in that waiting, they become invisible to others, to the world, and worst of all, to themselves. Society teaches men to be polite, to fit in, to not disturb the balance. But the truth is, no man ever changed his life by being agreeable. Every transformation, every breakthrough begins the moment a man dares to break the rules, not the laws of society, but the unspoken rules of weakness, fear, and silence. This is where Brazen begins. And once you taste it, there's no going back. To be brazen is not to be reckless. It is to be unapologetically alive. It is the fire that burns down hesitation and makes room for decision. When a man becomes brazen, he stops living for other people's comfort and starts living for his own clarity. He stops negotiating his value and starts commanding it. He doesn't ask if he's allowed to speak. He speaks, and the world listens. Because nothing pierces silence more than a man who has nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Brazen is not a mask. It is the removal of masks. It's when a man finally looks in the mirror and says, "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to be real." Most men were raised to be tame. They were taught that obedience is virtue and that ambition must come second to humility. But humility without backbone is not a virtue, it's a cage. A man can spend his entire life in that cage, smiling, nodding, submitting, and die having never lived a day on his own terms. Brazen is the moment you realize you don't owe anyone your silence. It's the force that unplugs you from guilt, shame, and all the false identities you've accumulated just to survive. And the minute you touch it, you feel it in your bones. This is who I really am. Something changes when you stop waiting to be chosen. When you stop chasing approval like a starving animal and start building your own standards instead. Brazen men don't wait to be invited to the table. They build their own table. And they don't beg for a seat. They take it. Because they understand that power isn't given, it's taken. Not through manipulation or force, but through unapologetic presence. A presence that says, "I'm here, I'm grounded, and I don't need your permission to exist fully." For a man who's been polite all his life, becoming brazen feels dangerous. It feels like betrayal, not to others, but to the version of himself he's kept on life support for years. That cautious, people-pleasing version. The one who kept his opinions soft and his dreams quiet. Killing that version is painful, but necessary, because a man cannot become whole until he buries what was never truly him. And brazen is the funeral. It's when you no longer pretend to be small just to make others feel comfortable. It's when you stop playing roles and start becoming the author of your own life. There's a myth that being brazen means being arrogant, that it's ego-driven, that it's aggressive. But arrogance is hollow. Brazen is rooted. Arrogance demands attention. Brazen commands it, silently. It walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere without speaking a word. Why? Because it is not trying to impress. It simply is. That energy, grounded, clear, self-contained, it doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't over-explain. It just moves forward. And people either move with it or get out of the way. And this is what most men never understand. People respect what you respect in yourself. If you carry yourself like you're optional, they'll treat you like you're replaceable. But when you step into the world with brazen energy, everything shifts. Opportunities come not because you asked, but because you embodied. People listen not because you shouted, but because you spoke from fire. And even silence becomes a weapon, because your presence alone says enough. Brazen doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring selectively. You stop wasting your energy on things that don't nourish your direction. You cut off the dead weight. You say no without apology. You don't explain your vision to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. And most importantly, you no longer try to prove your worth. You simply live it. Every day, in your choices, in your posture, in your silence, in your fire. This shift isn't easy. It burns. Because to become brazen is to kill comfort. And comfort is addictive. But if you're honest, you'll realize comfort never gave you peace. It only gave you numbness. And numbness is not freedom. It's a prison with velvet walls. Becoming brazen tears those walls down. It's raw. It's risky. But it's the only way to live a life that is truly yours. You don't become brazen overnight. It's a slow death of false selves and a steady resurrection of your core. It's not about changing who you are. It's about shedding who you're not. And every time you choose to speak up, take the risk, stand your ground, or walk away, a piece of the old you dies, and the real you rises. That's where we begin. The moment a man chooses brazen over approval, the world responds. Not always with applause. Sometimes with resistance, sometimes with silence, but always with clarity. People start revealing who they truly are when they can no longer control you. The masks drop, the games end, because brazen energy exposes insecurity in others like a spotlight. Those who benefited from your silence will resent your voice. Those who were comfortable with your obedience will label your freedom as rebellion. And that's the first lesson of this path. When you choose yourself, you will lose others, and it will hurt. But that pain is purification. It burns away the false alliances you once called love. A brazen man doesn't need to be understood. He needs to be true. That's the difference. And in that truth, he begins to walk a different road. Not one laid out for him, but one carved with each step he takes. There's no map, no applause, no safety net. Just instinct, clarity, and the unshakable knowing that the path is his alone. And that kind of path, while terrifying at times, is the only one worth walking. Because it leads not to the life others wanted for you, but to the life your soul has been screaming for all along. You begin to notice strange things. People who used to have power over you, their words, their moods, their validation suddenly seem small. You no longer need them to be okay for you to feel whole. You stop adjusting yourself to fit into rooms that shrink your spirit. And instead of asking, what do they think of me? You ask, does this feel right in my bones? That question alone changes everything, because it shifts your life from performance to presence. Brazen men don't chase compatibility. They create alignment. They don't blend in, they magnetize. The right people feel it. The wrong ones flee. It's not about aggression, but direction. When your energy is no longer diluted by fear, it becomes magnetic. You stop making small talk and start having real conversations. You stop playing social chess and start speaking your mind, not to provoke, but to free. Every word becomes a mirror. Every action becomes a declaration. This is who I am. Not for sale, not for rent, not negotiable. People often confuse brazen with coldness, but it's not that you feel less. It's that you no longer perform your emotions for approval. You feel deeply, but selectively. You give, but wisely. You love, but with boundaries. Because you've learned the cost of giving your fire to those who only wanted your warmth, not your light. And that's the quiet power of brazen living. You stop bleeding for those who wouldn't even hand you a bandage. You'll also start to see the contrast everywhere. Men who once seemed powerful now look hollow. Their confidence turns out to be borrowed, stitched together from social roles, material status, and external praise. You'll notice how loudly the insecure speak, how hard they laugh, how desperately they posture, and you'll no longer feel the need to compete with any of it. Because brazen doesn't seek to dominate, it seeks to be, and that being alone is more disruptive than any attempt to impress. Here's a secret most won't tell you. Being brazen is lonely at first, because the world teaches men to survive through compliance. So when you step outside that system, it doesn't know what to do with you. Friends fade, circles shrink, but the silence that follows is not emptiness, it's space. Space for the right people, for truth, for depth, and eventually you realize you're not alone. You are just clearing the noise to hear your real tribe calling. Brazen men walk into rooms without scanning for approval. They don't contort themselves to be palatable. They don't lower their frequency to match someone else's comfort zone. And when faced with conflict, they don't flinch, not because they enjoy it, but because they've stopped fearing it. Conflict isn't failure to them. It's information, a signal, a mirror. It shows where values collide, where masks fall off, where real alignment can begin. And instead of shrinking in the face of that, they expand. The internal shift is undeniable. You feel more alive, more grounded, more real. Not because life gets easier, but because you've stopped betraying yourself to make it tolerable. You accept discomfort not as punishment, but as a cost of authenticity. You start making moves without explaining yourself. You say no without guilt. You end conversations when your soul feels dismissed. And every time you choose alignment over approval, you gain something that no praise can buy: integrity. There's no manual for becoming brazen, no three-step program. It's a personal war between who you've been and who you're becoming, between the voice in your head that says, "Don't rock the boat," and the fire in your chest that says, "Sink the damn ship if it's heading nowhere." Most will never get there. They'll settle for imitation, for borrowed language, for shallow masks. But you, if you're here, you're already hearing the call, and that alone sets you apart. This path doesn't promise ease. It promises clarity, and clarity is a responsibility. Because once you know who you are, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer tolerate environments, people, or habits that insult your soul. You become allergic to your own excuses. And even in the moments where you doubt yourself, you'd rather face the world with your truth than hide behind a lie one more day. Brazen isn't a destination. It's a stance, a refusal, a choice to meet life with unfiltered presence. And it doesn't make you invincible. It makes you real. And in a world drowning in illusion, being real is the most dangerous thing you can be. Once you begin to live brazenly, you start to understand how much of your life was shaped by fear masquerading as wisdom. You see the compromises you made, not because they were right, but because they were safe. The relationships you kept, the jobs you stayed in, the words you never said, all of it held together by a silent agreement. Don't upset the balance. But that balance was never real. It was a cage, a well-decorated one, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. And when you finally stop playing your role in that charade, you realize how many people only love the version of you that didn't challenge them. There's no applause when you outgrow your mask. In fact, most people will resent you for it, because your transformation forces them to confront their own stagnation. Your courage highlights their cowardice. Your honesty disturbs their comfort. And without saying a word, your presence becomes a mirror they can't escape. That's why brazen men are often misunderstood. They're not aggressive, they're awake. And the world doesn't know how to deal with a man who no longer needs permission to be himself. You stop looking for answers in others, because deep down, you already know. You always knew, but you ignored your intuition in favor of social logic. You told yourself, maybe I'm overreacting, or maybe I should just be grateful, or this is just how it is. But brazen men don't speak in maybes. They speak in truth. And the truth is, anything that asks you to shrink is not love. Anything that punishes your honesty is not respect. Anything that drains your soul while praising your sacrifice is not alignment. it's manipulation. This awareness changes the way you interact with everything. You no longer cling to what's fading. You no longer chase what's running. You let things fall away without forcing explanations. And as you stop trying to hold together what was never meant to last, you begin to build something far more real, a life rooted in your values. Not borrowed beliefs, not inherited fears, not cultural scripts, your values. And that foundation is unshakable. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. There's a quiet dignity that comes with brazen living. It doesn't scream. It doesn't plead. It simply is. You no longer beg for clarity. You watch. You observe. You trust patterns over promises. You listen to how you feel in someone's presence instead of what they say. And in doing so, you become unshakable, not hardened, but centered. You no longer react from wounds. You respond from wisdom, because you felt what it's like to abandon yourself, and you vowed never to do it again. Most men were taught to build their worth on external approval. Be strong, be successful, be liked, be needed, but never, under any circumstances, be too much. Don't be too emotional. Don't be too intense. Don't be too honest. Don't want too much. But brazen men were born to be too much. That's where their power is. They don't dilute themselves to be digestible. They don't shrink to fit in. They know they weren't born to be liked. They were born to be true. And with this truth comes an unexpected gift, peace. Not the fragile peace of people-pleasing, but the solid peace of self-ownership. You sleep better. You breathe deeper. You trust your choices. Not because they're always easy, but because they're aligned. You know you'll lose people. You know it'll be misunderstood. But you also know that betraying yourself costs more than disappointing others. And when that realization sinks in, everything changes. You start to move differently. Your energy becomes cleaner. Your words carry more weight. You speak less, but say more. You stop trying to be impressive and start being impactful. You no longer argue for your value. You embody it. And that embodiment doesn't need validation. It radiates quietly, steadily, powerfully. Relationships evolve too. You stop tolerating emotional crumbs. You stop explaining basic decency. You stop chasing connection and start attracting resonance. You're not looking for someone to complete you. You're looking for someone to witness you. Not to fix your wounds, but to hold space for your wholeness. And when you operate from that level, you no longer settle for lukewarm love. You want depth. You want honesty. You want someone who isn't afraid of your fire because they've walked through their own. Even your definition of success changes. It's no longer about status or appearance. It's about alignment. You stop measuring your worth by how much you do and start honoring how well you live. You'd rather have one honest day than a lifetime of polite misery. You'd rather face the discomfort of growth than the emptiness of performance. And every step you take, even the uncertain ones, feels sacred because it's yours. But make no mistake, brazen living is not a shortcut to ease. It's a commitment to truth. And truth is not always comfortable. It will cost you illusions. It will cost you safety. It will cost you some relationships. But what you gain in return is priceless self-respect, clarity, inner authority, and a life that feels like home, even on hard days. You realize that life was never supposed to be about fitting in. It was about waking up, about becoming, about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And when you live from that place, you don't just survive, you create. You don't just endure, you lead. Not by force, but by example, by being the kind of man who walks in integrity even when no one's watching. Especially then. And maybe the most surprising part is this. The more brazen you become, the softer your heart gets. Not weaker, softer, because you no longer guard out of fear. You protect it out of love. You choose when and where to offer it, not because you're afraid of getting hurt, but because you finally know what it's worth. And in that balance between rawness and resilience, fire and focus, courage and care, you find your edge. And from that edge, you live. Once the process has begun, brazen living no longer feels like a decision. It feels like the only way to breathe. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't pretend that you're still satisfied with shallow conversations, hollow ambitions, or relationships that feed on compromise and emotional suppression. The moment you realize that you've been living half a life, there's no going back. And from that point forward, everything that once held your attention starts to feel strangely distant, like a dream you've finally woken up from. You no longer chase validation. You watch it fall away like dead leaves from a tree, and you don't mourn it. You let it go, because deep within, you now recognize something far more powerful, a self-defined truth that doesn't need applause. You've learned to sit in silence without fidgeting, to walk alone without shrinking, and to speak your mind without rehearsing how others might react. It's not arrogance, it's arrival. You've arrived into yourself, and now everything external must earn its place near you. But here's the paradox. As you become more stable within, the world around you begins to tremble. Your new clarity disrupts people who benefit from your confusion. Your boundaries offend those who thrived in your absence of them. Your calm becomes threatening to those who survive on chaos. And so, living brazenly doesn't always bring applause, it brings exposure. Not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Suddenly, the dynamics shift. You stop carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. You stop making excuses for people's patterns. You stop apologizing for outgrowing what was never meant to contain you. This isn't rebellion, it's alignment. And the more aligned you become, the less you tolerate anything that steals your energy in the name of normalcy. You stop explaining your decisions to people who have no idea where you're headed. You stop defending your evolution to those who benefit from your stagnation. And you stop showing up where you're only celebrated for staying small. Because brazen men don't shrink. They expand. Quietly, relentlessly, unapologetically. Even your relationship with fear changes. It doesn't disappear, it just stops leading the conversation. You still feel it, but now you see it for what it is, a checkpoint, not a stop sign. You learn that fear often arises right before a breakthrough. And instead of retreating, you lean in. You don't need certainty anymore. You need honesty. You don't crave comfort. You crave alignment. You're not looking for easy. You're looking for true. And that orientation shifts your entire trajectory. You also begin to feel the weight of your past lifting. Not because you forget it, but because you've learned how to carry it differently. You stop being defined by what hurt you. You stop identifying with your wounds. You've stared into your own shadows and came out not with shame, but with clarity. And that clarity becomes your compass. Not to avoid pain, but to stop repeating it. You no longer react to life through the lens of unprocessed trauma. You meet life with the eyes of someone who has confronted himself and chosen not to run. You stop blaming the world for not giving you what you never asked for. You stop expecting life to read your mind while you stay silent and agreeable. You find your voice, not to shout, but to speak with precision. You say what you mean. You ask for what you want. And you accept that some doors will close when you do, but you don't chase them anymore. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're not trying to be liked by everyone. You'd rather be alone with your integrity than surrounded by people who only love the version of you that serves their comfort. It becomes very clear that brazen living is not about being loud or dominant. It's about being rooted. It's about knowing what you value and refusing to abandon it when it becomes inconvenient. You stop negotiating with your truth just to avoid friction. You welcome the tension that comes with boundaries. You're not trying to avoid discomfort. You're trying to make your life congruent. And that congruence costs something. But the price of honesty is far less than the debt of self-betrayal. People notice. They sense it in the way you carry yourself. You don't flinch when confronted. You don't chase when someone pulls away. You don't panic in silence. You found something solid inside yourself, and it shows. Not in words, but in presence. Not in how you talk, but in how you listen. You hold space without needing to fix. You walk into rooms without needing to dominate. You're done performing. And in a world full of performance, that makes you magnetic. You don't seek power. You become power by being authentic. And that kind of power can't be manipulated because it wasn't borrowed. It was earned. In every hard conversation you didn't avoid. In every boundary you enforced when your voice trembled. In every moment you chose integrity over approval. That's where your strength comes from. And it doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't need applause. It just is. Eventually, the fear of being misunderstood becomes smaller than the pain of not being yourself. You stop explaining your evolution to people committed to misunderstanding it. You realize that your growth isn't offensive. Their comfort with your old self is. And in that awareness, you stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stand tall not to be seen, but because that's what happens when you stop hiding. You understand now that being brazen isn't just about what you do. It's about what you stop doing. You stop pleasing. You stop apologizing for your intensity. You stop diluting your thoughts to fit into fragile spaces. You stop softening your truth just to avoid triggering someone's insecurity. Because you've realized that your truth is not a weapon. It's a light. And it's not your job to dim that light for those still hiding from theirs. And while this path may be lonelier at times, it's never hollow. Because you'd rather walk alone with your integrity than march with a crowd that's headed nowhere. You know now, every step you take in alignment is sacred. Every no that honors your truth is holy. And every yes that comes from the depths of who you are, that's where the real life begins. By now, brazen living no longer feels like an effort. It's your natural state. It has reshaped your identity, not in the sense of becoming someone else, but finally returning to the man you were before the world told you who you should be. Everything that felt like struggle in the beginning, saying no, disappointing others, standing alone, now feels like breathing. You've reclaimed the right to your own direction, and that clarity has filtered into every corner of your life. Your time, your energy, your presence, all of it has become sacred. You realize that you no longer react, you respond. There's a difference. Reaction is survival. Response is sovereignty. Before, someone's opinion could shake you. A disapproving glance, a harsh word, a withdrawal of affection. Any of it could send you spiraling. But now you know who you are. You carry your own reflection within you. And that means the outside world can no longer distort your image. You still feel things deeply, but you no longer let feelings control your direction. You observe, you choose, you move. The beauty of this brazen energy is that it strips life down to the essential. You stop pretending. You stop negotiating your values in exchange for temporary comfort. You stop entertaining relationships that feel like quiet battles in disguise. You only walk where your soul is welcome. And when it's not, you leave. Not out of anger, but out of reverence for yourself. Because you've finally understood that peace isn't something you find, it's something you protect. Your work changes too. You stop hustling for worth. You stop climbing ladders placed against walls that don't belong to you. You stop chasing success defined by people whose lives you don't admire. You begin to build something from your core, something real, something that echoes your inner rhythm. And it might be slower, less glamorous, even misunderstood by others, but it's yours. And in that ownership, You find a quiet kind of power that doesn't need validation. It just speaks through consistency, presence, and depth. People sense it. Some are drawn closer, others pull away, and you let both happen without resistance. You no longer interpret someone's distance as rejection. You no longer interpret closeness as love. You've learned to observe behavior, not just absorb emotion. And with that wisdom, you start to notice how much of life is performance. How many people are addicted to pretending, to polishing masks, to rehearsing personalities that win approval but lose soul. And once you've tasted the real, you can't go back. You begin to see through things more quickly. You notice the manipulation hidden in charm. You feel the insecurity behind dominance. You sense the avoidance beneath niceness. Your intuition sharpens, not because you're suspicious, but because you're awake. Brazen men don't walk blindly. They walk with awareness of themselves, of others, of what is said and what is avoided. This awareness doesn't make you bitter. It makes you discerning. And that discernment becomes your compass, saving you years of wasted energy. Even in love, you no longer operate from desperation. You're not looking to be rescued. You're not trying to be completed. You meet others from a place of fullness, and that changes everything. You can see the difference between chemistry and compatibility, between desire and alignment, between attraction and truth. You stop holding on to people just because they feel familiar. You stop romanticizing chaos, and you stop confusing pain with passion. You want real connection now, not emotional survival disguised as love. Your relationship with discomfort also transforms. You no longer see discomfort as a problem to be avoided, but as a threshold to transformation. You lean into difficult conversations. You face awkward silences. You confront your own projections before blaming others. You know now that growth isn't neat, it's messy, raw, and humbling. And you're not afraid of that anymore. In fact, you welcome it. Because each time you walk through discomfort with integrity, you come out stronger, clearer, and more at home in your skin. And when things fall apart, as they sometimes still do, you don't collapse. You sit with it. You breathe through it. You ask better questions. Not, why is this happening to me? But what is this showing me about myself? You stop seeing life as punishment. You see it as feedback. And that shift turns every challenge into an opportunity to align deeper with your truth. You're not here to avoid pain. You're here to learn how to be unshaken by it. This new internal structure, it's unshakable because it's real. It wasn't built in comfort. It was built in solitude, in disappointment, in walking away from everything that no longer matched your soul. And because it was earned, no one could take it from you. Not rejection, not failure, not loss. You've learned that the only things worth keeping are the ones you don't have to betray yourself to maintain. And yet there's a softness too, a quiet gentleness beneath the fire. You become strong, but not hardened, protective, but not closed, discerning, but not judgmental. You can hold space for others without absorbing their chaos. You can empathize without abandoning yourself. You can love deeply without losing your center. Because now you know, real power is not domination, presence. And real masculinity is not control. It's grounded, open-hearted clarity. In this place, life becomes simpler, not easier, but simpler. You know who you are. You know what you're building. And you know what you're no longer willing to carry. You've stopped negotiating your value. You've stopped outsourcing your self-worth. And you've stopped believing that you need to earn your place in the world. You belong because you exist. And the more you remember that, the more your life begins to unfold in ways that feel like truth, not performance. You no longer fear being misunderstood. In the beginning, the fear of judgment used to tighten around your throat like a noose. You wanted to be liked, accepted, included. But now, being misunderstood feels like a small price for staying true to yourself. You don't need everyone to get you. You only need to get yourself. And when you do, the noise fades. You no longer bend to fit into places that shrink your voice. You no longer water yourself down to be digestible. You speak from clarity, and whoever is meant to hear you will. This shift doesn't happen overnight. Brazen men are forged, not born. There are nights when the silence will still ache. Mornings when the weight of responsibility feels like too much. Moments when you question if it would be easier to just go back to compliance, to softness, to approval. But deep down, you know, that version of you wasn't really living. It was surviving in disguise. And now that you've seen what life tastes like on your own terms, you can't pretend anymore. You can't unknow your power. You can't unfeel your truth. Your past no longer defines you. It teaches you. You stop carrying shame like a tattoo. The failures, the betrayals, the moments when you abandoned yourself, they're not wounds anymore. They're mirrors. They showed you what needed to die so something real could be born. And you don't resent those chapters. You thank them, because without the breakdowns, there would be no breakthroughs. You learn to turn regret into resolve, pain into direction, and loss into clarity. That is what brazen men do. They don't run from the fire. They walk through it until they emerge tempered. And yet, you don't walk around announcing your strength. Real strength doesn't need to declare itself. It's felt. It's seen in your calm when chaos erupts, in your stillness when others panic, in your refusal to engage in meaningless conflict, in your boundaries spoken without malice, in your absence when presence would require betrayal of yourself. That's the quiet revolution. You become the man who no longer participates in his own diminishment. And that withdrawal from self-abandonment changes everything. The world reacts differently to you now. Some respect you more, others fear you, and some resent you because you've stopped being easy to manipulate. You've stopped needing permission, and that threatens the fragile ego of those who only feel powerful when others shrink. But you don't fight them. You don't try to prove anything. Brazen men don't engage in battles that require them to betray their peace. You choose your wars now, and most of the time, you choose silence. Not because you're weak, but because your energy has become too expensive for nonsense. You notice how much of life used to be noise you mistook for truth. Social expectations, cultural conditioning, family roles, all these identities that were handed to you without your consent. Now you look at them with new eyes. You question, you challenge, you deconstruct, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. Because once you start living from the inside out, everything that was built on external validation begins to crack. And when it does, you don't rush to fix it. You let it fall. You let the falls crumble so the real can rise. Relationships become a reflection of your evolution. You no longer cling to what feels safe. You're drawn to what feels aligned. You're not impressed by charm. You're moved by depth. You don't chase excitement. You seek resonance. You stop asking, "Do they like me?" and start asking, "Can we grow in the same direction?" That changing question alone saves you years of heartache. Because you're no longer looking for someone to complete your story. You're looking for someone who already carries their own. And when no one is there, you're still whole. Solitude no longer feels like punishment. It feels like clarity. You sit with yourself in silence, in stillness, in discomfort, and you listen. You don't distract yourself with noise anymore. You face your fears. You talk to your shadows. You embrace the parts of you that used to scare you. Because now you understand. Anything you reject within yourself will end up controlling you. And anything you integrate becomes your power. Brazen living is not a performance. It's a remembering, a returning to the raw, unfiltered essence of who you are beneath the expectations, the labels, the shame. It's not about being loud or aggressive. It's not about defiance for the sake of defiance. It's about truth, precision, depth. It's about living in a way that your soul doesn't have to apologize for. And that kind of life doesn't look impressive on the surface, but it feels like freedom, and that's the only measure that matters. At some point, you realize that Brazen is not about being fearless. It's about being willing to stand alone, willing to be misunderstood, willing to lose comfort for the sake of integrity, willing to break cycles passed down for generations, willing to live a life that feels honest even if no one claps for it. That willingness, that sacred, grounded commitment becomes your compass. It leads you through uncertainty, through change, through rebirth. And yes, it costs you. It costs relationships built on compliance. It costs opportunities that depend on obedience. It costs comfort zones that promise safety but delivered stagnation. But in return, you get your life back. Your real life. The one that's not choreographed by fear. The one that doesn't need to be explained or justified. The one that whispers at night. This is who you were meant to be. And maybe not everyone will see it. Maybe some will call you difficult, arrogant, selfish. Let them. Your soul didn't come here to be digestible. It came to be whole. Brazen men are not here to decorate the world. They're here to disrupt it with truth, with presence, with the kind of strength that makes others remember their own. And when that happens, when your life becomes a mirror for someone else's potential, you realize this was never just about you. It was about becoming the invitation, the spark, the living proof that freedom is possible. And that is how Brazen changes a man's life.